Good morning and welcome to the Chester ARP Church Devotional Podcast. We'll get started at Romans chapter 1. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us as we talk this morning about Romans chapter 1, continuing in our reading of it. Thanks for joining us again today. This is Paul talking about how he longs to go to Rome. Romans chapter 1, beginning in verse 8. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed in all the world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I mention you always in my prayers, asking that somehow, by God's will, I may now at least succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. That is, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you, as well as the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation to both Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and the foolish. So I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. Now, this is an important note just as we get started in the book of Romans. Paul has never seen Rome. He's never been to Rome. He's never visited with the people there in Rome. He's only heard of them. So in verse 8 he says, I thank my God through Jesus Christ my Lord, because your faith is proclaimed all over the world. He has heard throughout the world of the faith of the Romans. Now, this is not surprising to us because Rome was a strategic city. All roads come to Rome. All roads meet in Rome. The idea is if we had a church in Rome, people would come to Rome and they would interact with the gospel, and then they would leave from Rome. Perhaps they've been transformed by Jesus and transformed by the gospel of Jesus Christ. Maybe they just had an encounter with Christians there in Rome, and there was something different about them. And so they would go out of Rome and go back home. And so as they went back home, then they would, quote, gossip the gospel. In other words, they would tell the story. They would talk about what took place in Rome. They would talk about the Christians in Rome. They would talk about what is happening in Rome. And that's how Paul heard of them. That's how Paul heard about what was going on there. Paul's great desire was to pray for them and to encourage them and to lift them up, and he is praying that God would use them mightily to advance his kingdom. He wanted to go visit them so that he could be encouraged and he could encourage them. You see, that's one of the beauties of the Christian faith, is that we want to have mutual encouragement to one another. We want to tell the story of how God is at work in each other's lives. And we want to encourage one another to tell that story. We want to encourage one another to grow in grace, and we want to pray for one another. And Paul was here giving us a beautiful picture of what it means to care for one another. Yeah, we're not Apostle Paul. We're not Paul himself. We're not, most of us listening here aren't pastors. We're not leaders of churches. We may not even be officers in churches, but we're Christians. And as Christians, we know that we have the privilege and the opportunity to pray for one another, to build each other up, to strengthen one another in the grace and mercy of God. And Paul says here, I don't want you to be unaware, uninformed. I've often wanted to come to see you. I would love to reap some harvest there. And then Paul talks about how he's under obligation to both Greeks and to barbarians. Paul had a specific calling to share the good news of Jesus to those who are of the Greek persuasion, of the Greek background, as well as Romans, as well as barbarians, those outside the Roman Empire. Paul's great desire is to go forth and share the good news of Jesus Christ. I think we've got a lot to learn from this passage. Just briefly, we can pray for one another, we can build each other up, we can tell the story of how God's at work in each other's lives, and then we also can have a desire to see that other people come to know Jesus, kind of walk with that burden. I know that's convicting to me as a pastor, but as a person, as a follower of Jesus. Do I have a burden to tell people about Christ? Do I have a burden to live a life that is faithful unto the Lord? So let me just challenge you and encourage you with that today as you go forward into your day. Pray for one another, build each other up, lift each other up, tell those stories, and then tell the story of Jesus so that people can come to know him as Lord and Savior. You guys have a great day. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow. Chester ARP Church Devotional Podcast. Take care.